Why are so many people suddenly confused by singular, they? Most people only ever used singular, they, when referring to an unseen person of unknown gender. Like if you were with someone who is on the phone, you might ask that person, "What are they saying?" Quote, referring to the person on the other end of the phone. You don't know who that person is, and so don't know whether to say he or she, and thus default to they. Whereas if you're in person, people basically always call someone he or she, and so aren't used to calling someone they, if they can actually see and know the person. Still, it shouldn't be too awkward to get used to. I think people are making a bigger deal out of it than it is. I think it's one of those things people intuitively know, but don't know they know. And when they think about it, it sounds confusing. Sort of like the order of adjectives. If I was going to the store to get bananas, and I wanted green ones that are large, and I wanted 6 of them, I'd get 6 large green bananas. But if someone were to explain the ordering of adjectives, people would look on skeptically. It can be confusing at times, and it's not bigoted to acknowledge this. Last year, I tried reading a novel written in third person, featuring a non-binary protagonist, and couldn't make it past the 3rd chapter because I was constantly lost as to whether they referred to the singular protagonist, the protagonist's family, their circle of friends, or their town community. I enjoy a challenging read, but this was headache-inducing. Perhaps a more talented author could add enough context clues to prevent this confusion. But I haven't encountered any examples so far. They is used informally when there is no confusion about who is they. For instance, the person who left a blue backpack at security, they should return to security to pick it up. It is unambiguous who the they is. Singular they has been used like that informally for a long time. Contrast that to the Mets have great relievers this year, especially lefty McCleft. They struck out the side in the last 2 innings. In that case it would be impossible to know if they refers to the Mets relievers or just lefty McCleft. This is where it does get complicated. There are many articles in, for example, Slate where I have to read several times over because of ambiguous they. What will happen is that people will either get used to being more precise, for instance specifically mentioning either lefty or the Mets relievers in the second example, or we'll have things like tell or they's modeled on y'all or y'alls to stop the confusion. I used to be taught in grade school that they is plural and when gender is unknown for a singular person to use he or she, or him or her. It was just one of those things that was ingrained in me. And switching over doesn't come as natural to me as it comes to others. I have to think about it and correct myself. It's because people don't think about their own native language. You can speak English without ever knowing what grammatical order English is in, or what an adjective is. So even thought they regularly use singularly they in sentences like, someone lost their wallet. I hope they come back and find it, they never realize it. As a slightly older person, 43, it really does feel like bad grammar. I wish we had a singular gender-neutral pronoun other than it, since it is obviously too demeaning to use for person. Since they/them has become the standard for this, it's what I use. But I wish one of the alternative singular gender-neutral pronouns would have caught on instead. There are tons of not native English speakers, so it is confusing. As not native English speaker I am still discovering things I don't know. As a non-native speaker, I've been studying English for 22 years now. Since I was 6, I've learned that you can use they this way only. Like 2 years ago, and it's still hella bizarre to me. You certainly cannot do that in my native language. And it's not a simple concept to fully grasp. You can accept it, but it feels unnatural. Hope that makes any sense. Because they was previously used as ambiguous singular. Subject gender unknown. Or plural. Refer to group. Only. Now we are using it in personal singular context. Which, while grammatically correct, it's something a lot of people just aren't used to. I am middle-aged. The older you get, it does take some gymnastics mentally to shift around things like how you process the rules of language or the universe works. For example, people still struggle with accepting that there are 8 planets, not 9 due to Pluto being downgraded. However, I have basically been able to make the pronoun shift to singular, they, in my head now with about a 15% error rate. When I make the mistake and realize it and quickly correct myself, people are basically pretty cool about that. I have a great deal of multicultural experience and global travel. I would not consider myself a linguist, but I do know a couple of languages and have studied probably 4 or 5 languages over the years where I have a beginner level of understanding about the rules and such. I know, for sure, that languages shift and evolve, as do societies and cultures. I default to what is generally a respectful way of addressing all people. The adjustment toward flattening language and informalizing titles and honorific type of things, like Ms., Mr., Dr., Professor, Sir, Ma'am, and etc., not having clear trans or inclusive titles like that has actually been trickier for me, but that is a little off topic for this post. The point is that we're trying to be respectful, polite, and reflect basic decency into the world. So we put in the effort when it comes to getting these things right. What I had to do was let go of the automatic grammar rule around the use of they, them. For a while I kept hitting a little catch in my brain where like I needed some kind of reason why I was saying they instead of he or she. And the rule finally came back to me as that is literally none of my business, and it does not matter to me in the slightest. So the new rule is, the person wishes to be called they, or they have told me that the previous pronoun has changed to something else. He, she, they, them, or whatever it is. I'm short. The new rule is that I call people what they want to be called. People matter and their deeply held desires matter, and it is worth a small amount of intellectual effort on my part to make the shift. So, we need to center people and their inherent dignity and value with this societal evolution or course correction. As a middle-aged person who is just figuring out some of these shifts to social rules, grammar, and so on, I think that when people have a problem with making these adjustments, they have a problem valuing others and their desire of how to be addressed. As someone who learned English as a second language, never in any class within the United States or my home country was they presented as a singular. It would have definitely confused the hell out of everyone. I have read plenty of books in English and I cannot think of one instance when they is used as singular. If you're on the younger side, like most of Reddit, you may not realize how relatively recent this trend is. A good portion of Gen X was taught to use he as the indefinite singular pronoun, and it was not considered offensive or unusual if the target turned out to be female. I would have expected a correction on my paper in school if I used they to refer to a single person, because they has been plural forever. It's because people only use they when referring to someone whose gender they didn't know, and when they did it they were told it was grammatically incorrect. I was in high school before the trans movement became mainstream and before most people knew what non-binary was. My English teachers always told us that they, referring to a single person, was incorrect, and if we didn't know the gender, we should just say he. One of my more liberal teachers told us we could say she if we wanted to, but we couldn't use they because it wasn't grammatically correct. Any time we would write they in reference to a singular person, we would lose points. It's been ingrained in our heads not to do it. And this wasn't that long ago. I graduated from high school as 2016, so it makes sense a lot of people are having a hard time getting used to it. Singular, they, is super common in conversational English but was considered grammatically incorrect in formal writing until recently. In college in the 1990s, I was trained to use he or she to be inclusive, but just he was acceptable. Eventually common usage makes its way into formal composition manuals. English is an emergent language. No authority oversees word choice or grammar. I've seen people use singular they my whole life. We've been using singular they for forever. You're not very old, are you? Thinking face. There actually have been a couple of shifts in how singular they is used in recent decades. But they're pretty subtle. The first is that, while it's always been oakish to describe a hypothetical individual using they, them pronouns, it used to be much more common to use he, him pronouns for this. Especially in formal writing. Nowadays, we might write, suppose someone is walking down the street and they, but in the mid-20th century, people would have been more likely to write, suppose someone is walking down the street and he. People started to see that as sexist and old-fashioned. But initially the two most common replacements were constructions like he or she, and randomly alternating between he and she. The latter became unpopular because it made everyone inject gender stereotypes into their writing. Hypothetical doctors would tend to be he, and hypothetical nurses would tend to be she. For example, the he or she approach is just awkward. It's only pretty recently that academic writing has shifted in favor of they, them. And many of the well-known style guides used to advise against it. The second shift is that we now have people who are referred to using they, them pronouns consistently, even when we're talking about them as an individual and we know their gender. And even in formal writing. The real mystery is why people get so mad about linguistic changes in the first place. Not just on politically charged topics but even stuff like using like as a filler or switching the order of the consonants in ask. I'm a millennial. My school teachers wouldn't allow using they as a singular pronoun, but stressed using gender-neutral language. Like using words like firefighters instead of firemen, and for a single individuals. We'd use nouns like this person or this individual if the sex or gender wasn't specified, instead of automatically defaulting to he and him. A fake they still isn't accepted as a single pronoun in formal writing. However, people don't talk in formal writing style 24/7 like they expect to be graded by grammar teachers. They has been used pretty naturally in informal speech for a long time. But then people might not have paid much attention to it. I can understand a bit that sometimes if you pay much more attention to a smaller issue than normal, it begins to feel weird. The more cynical reason is that maybe at least a few of those people are deliberately trying to pretend they don't understand the issue under the guise of grammar sanctity. I don't think that applies to everybody that struggles with this, but there are probably a few people that would think that it was clever to address an issue that made them uncomfortable this way. I wish there was a more widely accepted non-gender pronoun for use describing a singular person. That's all.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. Epic Ericast is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.